Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. This week we're coming at you with two brand new reviews for two brand new records. We'll be talking about the brand new album from Bloc Party, Alpha Games. We're also going to be talking about the new album from synth-pop duo Let's Eat Grandma. We're going to be talking about their new album, Two Ribbons.
Two of them.
And this week on our record club, it is for 2 weeks in a row my record club review, just because we moved some stuff around, just because it is the 30th anniversary of one of this podcast's favorite musicians, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds album, Henry's Dream.
It is the 30th anniversary of Nick Cave. He's 30 today.
Yes, 30. He's 30 big and bright years. This week, we also put up two videos other than our main episode last week, where we covered the new album by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard and Pusha T. We talked about Kendrick Lamar's entire discography. Ryley and myself talked about all of the studio releases from Kendrick Lamar in preparation for his new album, which is coming out next week. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Oh boy. Get hyped. Whoa. Go watch that. It's been getting a whole lot of views, so thank you for that, everyone. We also did a dual review. We talked about the highs and lows of Christian radio rock when we talked about Switchfoot's The Beautiful Letdown and Skillet's Awake, a rip-roaring good time of an episode where a couple of us may have lost our minds.
I've got a video I don't think I've talked about on this podcast that needs to be shouted out.
Oh. Yeah,
a video review of the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 motion picture with my good friend Monica and another friend of hers. If you're looking for a daily dose of autism in short form, it is a solid video for you.
Anyway, check that out. Check out all these videos if you haven't already. I think they're all really, really great. But let's get into what we've been listening to for the last 7 days. As per usual, Jake, what have you been listening to?
Well, first thing I want to talk about this week is I guess it's not technically one of the biggest releases of the year, unless you're like just super into music. Like it's not like it's not like a Kendrick Lamar kind of release, but a much anticipated release came out last week in the form of the second album from Mos Def and Talib Kweli's hip hop project, Black Star. No Fear of Time, on like a podcast app, which I totally legally listened to
100%.
On that app. Definitely 100%, all 34.8 minutes of it. Regardless, not a very long record, but I gave that a listen just because that's had a lot of hype behind it recently. Also with the fact that it has the production of Madlib, of course, work with, fucking Madlib. He's Madlib. He's worked on like 10 dozen albums that are canonical classics. No Fear of Time, not really a canonical classic, if I'm being honest. Everybody seems to really like this album so far, but this is just kind of
mid.
Yes, it's very competent work from these three main people. There's a good Black Thought feature. That's pretty good. I just have nothing interesting to say about this album, which is kind of indicative of what the problem with it is in general, in that, like, this is the fucking Black Star reunion album and Madlib is producing it, and my answer is it's fine. The rapping is fine. I'm not gonna lie, Mos Def and Talib both sound kind of tired on this. First couple tracks on here, there's kind of a stretch here in the middle where like there are a couple like total non-starters here. There's some good songs on here too, though, but it's just like, I don't know. It really feels like an app or a music project that's connected to a fucking app.
Yeah.
It feels like the rollout was so unceremonious. The announcement for it was like, got a lot of old head attention, like, oh shit, Black Star. And then it's just kind of like the production on it is very stock Madlib and very kind of like dirtier, grimy beats. There's like an attempt to make some of them sound kind of like space-y and like weird, and like that's kind of cool, but it's also like, I don't know, that's like easily the least impressive thing he's made in like the past 10 years. Like the shit he did with Freddie Gibbs on Bandana on his fucking iPad was better than this. So like,
I listened to this week as well, and I basically agree, Jake. This was very underwhelming for me. I actually went back and revisited the first Black Star album, which honestly is a very good record, a borderline great one. I think I don't care for that as much as the general consensus. It's very much a record that I think starts strong and ends amazingly, but has a little bit
that
of
back
like
half.
some middling songs in the middle. So I was kind of like, yeah, sure. And I checked out the new one, and I was like fully prepared to have like this like hot take, like, oh, maybe I'll like the new one even more than the original. Wouldn't that be a steaming hot take? And then listen to this, and it's just like, it's so underwhelming. Like the thing that about it is like, especially considering it's a Mad Lib production, I don't have any issues with the production really, although it does feel very unadventurous. The real issue is the mixing of this record.
Yeah.
It sounds so like dulled and like quiet and really sort of like kind of grainy, and just it has this sense of like
subtleties you want from Mad Lib are just not really here.
It feels very cheap, and it also, like, you're right about, there's this, especially Mos Def, I think, sounds like he's half asleep, and I get that he kind of has that thing where he has this sort of flow where he does sort of sound that way, and Talib is like much more sort of animated by comparison, but still I think that frankly, like, and this was something I noticed about some of the songs on the original Black Star record, is when I sit down with the lyric sheet in front of me, they're very talented at rapping, and they're very like, they can do really interesting word plays, and they can be funny even when they want to be. But honestly, sometimes as writers, they will just spin their wheels. And I feel like I'm getting a whole bunch of like, especially from Mos, who will rap, who like try and do like as many rhymes as possible of like really intricate 3 or 4 syllable words. And I'll just feel like the impression I get away from it is kind of like, well, okay, but are you actually saying anything? And that's
rhyming first, lyricism second.
And that, yeah, absolutely. That's not something that I get all the time. There's definitely some strong moments. I think that the new record ends pretty strong with the last couple of tracks, where you actually get a couple of songs that are allowed to breathe for more than just 2 minutes, and you get some properly like really strong verses and verse kind of like mic trading and stuff that I really enjoyed. But to me, the entire concept felt very thin and not particularly thoughtfully executed, and just really sort of underwhelming. I mean, the last couple of weeks have been like that for me, where it's been like 35-minute projects from rap artists that I expect are going to really deliver something, and they just kind of don't ever ignite. So I have to agree. It was and being rapturously received. So I guess, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is just kind of like, I just sort of think that like it's not because anything on there is like aggressively like bad or even like quantifiably bad, really. It's just that like people are just so hungry for more of these two, and them coming up and showing up and being competent is just sort of enough to satiate the immediate hunger for a Black Star reunion album. So part of me thinks that that's gonna dip a little bit in terms of reception, but what do I know? In terms of hip-hop projects that didn't woefully disappoint me, a weird little bit of a shout here, in that is not an official project in, I guess, the traditional sense, but basically I went out of my way because of some tweets by one Mr. Kevin Always Believe What I Say All the Time Abstract of Brockhampton, talking about how the real version of their 4th album to be team effort / puppy / no official title was at one point is supposedly out there online, and there are like several versions of it that are amalgamated with demos and some live performances and stuff, and I listened to some of them a while ago, and just to hear them, and I listened to the one that's sort of canonically accepted by the fans as being the most accurate version of it thus far, which I think is good. There's actually a lot of really great tracks and moments on there, specifically the track that hasn't fully leaked online, that supposedly in its final form had a feature from Mary J. Blige, which is the song Ready for War, which is like, I mean, even as it is in its basically demo state, where like one of the verses from, I think, Amir is like half a live performance. This is like a Brockhampton like golden goose thing. Like, this song is fucking fantastic. Even in its very roughly recorded form, it's something that I highly recommend seeking out, and I really understand the sort of fan desire to want this in its studio form. But in doing so, I sort of compiled a lot of other releases from the band just because I wanted to have all of their music that isn't on their studio albums. So I endeavored to find the Technical Difficulties compilation, which is a compilation of all the stuff that the band released right before they did Roadrunner. Some of the songs that are even on the Technical Difficulties thing, like some of the beats and some of the verses, like Chain On, made it onto the final version of the album. But this is sort of just all of the songs that they released that are, some of them are like 1 minute to 2 minutes long, and some of them are more proper songs, but some fans went and compiled it online and they put it all together. And as a fan of Brockhampton, yeah, this, I mean, is more or less what I expected. I only listened to like half of these when they came out just because I got the impression that they were kind of a less substantial project when I heard some of them being like sounding a little bit more like interludes. But once you put them all together, they actually do come together as a pretty solid project of 40 plus minutes of music. If you just want to hear like Brockhampton doing their thing, doing verses over some pretty slick production stuff that sounds like it would go right in on the Roadrunner sessions, then seek this out. I highly recommend it. It's not like in any official capacity, but you can find it on SoulSeek really easily, or just make a playlist of it of stuff on YouTube. I think the really remarkable thing about it really is the flow of it, is that like, I think it's just compiled in chronological order, but the fact that it all does hang together as sort of its own project of being like Brockhampton's Endless. If I wanted to compare it to something like the Frank Ocean project, I'd say that that's pretty highly comparable. Just moments where the band can kind of let loose a little bit and be a little bit weirder in terms of, I think, what's expected from them. They sort of let this sort of loose format be something that they can operate within in terms of just being a little bit more experimental, being a little bit weirder, and it still delivers with some really solid meat and potatoes Brockhampton tracks and good verses. So yeah, if you're a fan, I would highly recommend seeking that out. It's fun stuff. Another thing I listened to is that a long time ago, God, I don't even remember if it was even like within the last 6 or so months, but Ryley talked about a band that I think was signed to the same label as Have a Nice Life.
The Flenser.
I listened to the project from Planning for Burial, their album Below the House, their most recent album. Not their most recent project, funnily enough, just because their most recent project is actually taking this album and like running it through like warped tape effects and stuff and making like this weird noise collage with it, which I'm interested to check out after this. But Planning for Burial's album Below the House is so fucking good. I feel so bad that I slept on this act just because I'm such a huge fan of Dan Barrett and Have a Nice Life. Like, if you love the sort of noisier shoegazy parts of Have a Nice Life sound, this is for you. This is them doing like, it's a little bit drony at parts too, but they have just moments on here where the tracks just absolutely soar. I even might have, technically speaking, sort of underrated this on first listen just because I was almost taken aback with how much I liked it, that I was just like, maybe I need to reel back and give this some multiple listens. But this is obviously going to be something that I check out in terms of like, I'm going to go through their whole discography. And I also wanted to check out their first album just because Ryley had recommended it. But yeah, this is definitely in the same vein. If you're not into this whole weird kind of DIY sonic aesthetic of Have a Nice Life, it's probably not going to be your cup of tea. But if you just want really like drony shoegaze, but it's also like kind of lo-fi, I would actually say that this has a significant overlap in terms of appeal with the most recent Parannoul project, To See the Next Part of the Dream. A lot of the same vibe, except I said this in the chat that Parannoul was sort of an album that made me think of like summer and warmth and youth. And this is an album that makes you feel like you're trapped in a shitty house in the middle of winter and you're older and jaded and want to kill yourself. So naturally, I loved it. I listened to my second album by RX Bandits. I talked about their album And the Battle Began a little while ago, I think like last month or so, as basically a ska punk version of the Mars Volta. And this is their last album, and it has kind of a weirder psychedelic space rocky shit with their sound called Gemini Her Majesty, which is damn fucking good. Not quite on the level of And the Battle Begun for me, but incredibly comparable quality wise. Just another great just outing from them if you want another really interesting piece of very strange ska punk progressive rock that's kind of inflected with post-hardcore. Absolutely for you. And last but not least, actually, I'd say this is the best thing I listened to all week. I listened to my third album from Lightning Bolt. I listened to Fantasy Empire. Fuck. I was not expecting to think that this was as good as Sonic Citadel, but holy fuck, it's as good as Sonic Citadel. And for surprisingly very different reasons. This is a warmer, more psychedelic, I won't say it's a more relaxed record because again, it's a Lightning Bolt album. Its first and only priority is to beat the ever-loving fuck out of you. It's just a sound that feels inherently a little bit more inviting. I would say that this isn't out of the realm of like, this sounds a lot like what the Flaming Lips would have done in like their really earlier days, sort of like pre-Yoshimi, if it was focused on just like straight noise on occasion, especially like the first track. A lot of it feels like really the instrumentation, a lot of it just really comes together and feels a lot more enveloping rather than Sonic Citadel's approach, which is just to, you know, beat you over the head a little bit. I do still prefer that album, but surprisingly, only narrowly. This is just another project from them that's just absolutely sensational. If you want some great noise rock, yet again, Lightning Bolt don't miss.
I love that. As one thing I want to note on the Rate Your Music page, the top rated review is it just made me laugh so much. Did I just hear a melody? Fucking sellouts.
There's a couple of them on there. They're melodies that come in between guitars and drums that sound like they're so blown out they could barely be considered recorded, but you know, fucking
yeah, it's just funny because, and you'll discover this, I'm sure, records like A Wonderful Rainbow and I Have Magic Mountain, like you just have like one note for like 9 minutes and they'll just absolutely hammer it at like 500 times a second, and it's insane. What a band. What an absolutely
they're so good. They're slowly becoming one of my new favorite bands. Just
they're off this fucking plane. All right, August, what have you been listening to recently that you want to shout out?
I guess the first thing I will touch upon is a previous record club of ours, a record called Israel Boy by a band named Say Anything. And this was an album I checked out, and this is I had a very mixed reaction to this because on one hand, and very similar to what Jake said in the episode about it, in that on one hand, there's a lot I love about this album. There are some fucking absolutely phenomenal songs, like Belt is goddamn amazing. There was even like one specific line which I thought was funny as fuck that Jake also noted on a Yellow Cat / Red Cat. The fucking Buddha line is the funniest shit ever. That's
fuck me.
I love that bit. And you know, there's also shit like Every Man Has a Molly, which is just a fucking funny song that it's so goddamn hilarious. Then there's parts of this record that just make me want to fucking castrate the lead singer because Jesus Christ, shut the fuck up.
I think you said you had similar issues that I did with the song The Closer Admit It, I believe.
Oh yes, Admit It was a song I just found absolutely insipidly annoying.
A song that sounds like it's sung by Rosario Dawson and fucking Rent.
Good album though. I enjoyed it overall. And if you're into the pop punk emo flavored pop stuff, well worth a listen. Something else from a pretty famous group called Outcast, I listened to ATLians. This is just a fucking fun album. I love the dynamic between Andre 3000 and Big Boy, where you've got the more braggadocious kind of side, and you've got the weirder, zanier stuff from Andre. Very good dynamic they have. Amazing hooks.
It's the album that has two Dope Boys. It has Wheels of Steel. It has Elevators. It has
Got the
13th Floor.
Wheels of Steel.
Oh God, this album's so fucking stacked.
And also, it's got its own title. It's got the title track.
Yeah,
with
the title track is a
fucking-
classic.
Mhm.
with a hook the size of Moby's dick. Another album I'll talk about from a band I rediscovered and talked about on another segment. Thursday's second album, War All the Time. Quite honestly, I wasn't as big a fan of this as I am Thursday's Full Collapse. I don't like the production as much. I think it comes off as a little sterile at points. And for a band like this, I feel that's a detriment to their sound. And I think there are some songs where Jeff Rickley is really pushing his voice in directions that it doesn't work in, and pushing his songwriting abilities in directions that are perhaps a touch too melodramatic for even my taste in Thursday's music. That being said, still a lot of solid tracks on here. Still a record I mostly enjoyed. It's just there were a lot more smaller things that took me out of the experience as opposed to something like Full Collapse. I'd like to listen to more of their records, but
Yeah,
this was just maybe not the one for me.
fair enough. I honestly can't say that's all that surprising, considering sort of the bluntness of the subject matter. It's very much a post 9/11 record in a lot of very unsubtle ways, and it doesn't quite have like the fantastic flow that Full Collapse has. But yeah, I definitely love this record. I think the title track is one of their best songs.
Oh yeah, title track's very good.
And I also really like the opener on this record as well. Yeah, it's certainly not a record I've spent as much time with compared to Full Collapse, but I understand why Morgan's such an ardent defender of this, and I do still intend to listen to the rest of their records as well, since everyone who likes this band seems to think that they never really dropped off all that much. So
Now I will get into two recommendations from someone sitting with me right now. One, Ryley. Like a week or two back, I asked you what are some indie rock records I should check out to broaden my palette.
yes, and I will say before you go into this, with this list, I was specifically trying to treat a balance of records I thought you would like, but also records that you might not like, but I think you need to listen to anyway, just because to like get a understanding of like the history of indie rock and stuff. So
Yes.
I think, and I've seen your ratings for these two records, so I think these two records neatly reflect, I think, both sides of that thing, where you have one that I wasn't 100% sure you were going to fully get on board with, although I will say I'm a little sad you don't like it more, and another where I'm like not surprised that you have connected with it.
I'll get into the positive side first, because I am well known for positivity on this podcast.
Famously,
Famously, which is Pavement's Crooked Rain, Crooked
Oh.
Rain.
Yeah.
This is an album that I would say in the lineage of kind of indie rock, this is pre Built to Spill, post Dinosaur Jr., with maybe a dash more like REM and Jangle influence thrown in than Built to Spill ever had.
Mhm.
I really think the guitar parts are quite good here. The band's kind of psychedelic flourishes are really good. I think they're really strong, emotionally evocative songwriters, particularly that opening song, Silence Kit. Singles are all pretty great. I think there are a couple songs on here that maybe peter out a little in terms of instrumental ideas feeling a little too overambitious or underrealized, maybe one or the other. But for the majority of it, I think this is a really solid, well-measured album that I absolutely see why it's considered a classic within its genre.
I think
And-
it's generally agreed. Like if you look at the kind of indie rock, obsessives, that Gold Sounds is generally regarded to be like the greatest indie rock song of like the first wave of indie rock in the 90s. And I mean, it's hard to disagree. That song is fucking transcendental.
No, that's a beautiful song.
Cut Your Hair as well was a song that actually had surprising level of radio success for a band like this.
Yeah, that
I remember seeing the music video for that as a kid on TV, being replayed,
and even Range Life started one of the most hilarious feuds in all of music.
Absolutely.
Billy Corgan's head rent free.
It's so funny because it's not even really a diss against Smashing Pumpkins. It's more a diss of people who think that way, like coming from the perspective of like an older, more tired hard rock band. That's who they're like satirizing, but it's so funny for this then Billy Corgan and the monument up his own ass to be like, this is a slight against me.
Yeah.
So quite funny. Clearly he wasn't reading the lyrics on Genius. Otherwise he would have gotten it. And now the album I wasn't so hot about, being Interpol's Turn on the Bright Lights. Truth be told, my relationship with this album is a lot older than a week. It actually goes back about 2 years because I've heard this album about half a dozen times at this point, and I've just been trying to really get into it. And this most recent batch of like 4 listens definitely helped with my understanding, because now having a bit of a better understanding of the scene that Interpol helped to pioneer and create, I feel like I had a much better entry point into this band's style and their texture and sound. And I really do appreciate that aspect of them. I think there are flashes of stylistic perfection, and I think the first song, Untitled, is amazing. That's, in my opinion, the best song on the album. The thing is, I've just never gotten into Interpol. I find their music so unengaging. I can't even really put my finger on it because it's a lot of I see the appeal. I get it. I have a mathematically perfect understanding of why this band is well regarded and why this band is influential, pioneering. I just find there's a character of like self-seriousness and a real lack of fun and like finesse to Interpol's music that just, for me, really drags the experience down. And I have not ever been able to properly engage with them.
This has always been an album I've struggled with as well, August, so I honestly find this mildly vindicating. I've also listened to this like a half a dozen times, and each time I'm just like, am I missing something? Because I feel like I am, and I just
I'm glad I've listened to it as much as I have, because I really do like what this album did. And hell, I mean, groups like Bloc Party would not exist in the same way and in the same capacity that they do today without Interpol. I'm fully cognizant of
thank
that.
God
It's
Bloc
just-
Party exists today.
It's just thank God Bloc Party exists for me. So that's a bit of my unfortunate relationship with this album. Please don't crucify me.
I don't think I need to comment at all. Like anyone who knows me probably knows this is one of my favorite records of all time. One of the records that
Is it really? I
Yes.
didn't actually know that.
I guess I don't know why maybe I haven't mentioned it as much. It's just kind of been the thing.
I know
that I
Morgan
guess,
loves the album because that's how I found out about it, but I didn't know you loved it.
yeah, this is one of the albums that made me fall in love with rock music in general. Like
Oh my
this
God.
album fundamentally has been in my life for a long time. It's just like it's exactly my brand of like really punchy, but also like rhythmically has a lot of heft. And he rock and just the guitar tones of Daniel Kessler are like, I mean, it's like Johnny Greenwood's guitar tones or like, the REM guitar tones or whatever. It's just like a sound that once it was in my life, I was like, I didn't know I was missing this, and now I never want to be without it. And yeah, later in the year, I think Morgan and I were discussing this. Later in the year, I think Morgan and I, at the very least, maybe Connor as well, are going to do a 20th anniversary retrospective on this, and hopefully get to articulate a little bit better than just it is good why it feels this way to us. But yeah, I'm glad that you guys have given it a fair shot anyway. Like, I mean, I can't ask for anything more than that. All right, a couple of things I will shout out that I've been listening to recently. I finally caught up with an indie pop sort of classic that also turns 20 this year, which is Ryley Kiley's album, The Execution of All Things. Ryley Kiley are a classic Nebraskan band, very much like a Saddle Creek Records band. And you can very much tell when you listen to them that this is the band that's, on the same label as Bright Eyes around this era. Jenny Lewis's vocal performances are incredibly strong. You have Mike Mogus, who is, of course, one of the key members of Bright Eyes, engineering this record, producing this record, and playing a number of instruments on it. It's a great indie record. It has great songs on it. The Good That Won't Come Out, The Execution of All Things, A Better Son, Daughter.
Better Son and Daughter is one of my favorite songs fucking ever. I love that song.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is one of those records where there's like several songs on it that you just think, wow, okay, this is a classic song. I think I need to have a little bit more time with it to fully love the entire record. There's a couple of songs I don't love as much on there, but overall, like, it's a really striking album, and I can see why it's regarded so highly. And if anything, I feel like it deserves to be regarded a little bit more highly, because it feels like one of those things that everyone who's heard it loves, but a lot of people generally don't necessarily hear as much about Ryley Kiley, which is a shame, especially considering that Jenny Lewis has gone on to have a very successful solo career of her own. So that record gets a recommendation from me.
I love her video essays. She's very good.
Moving swiftly along, another artist that I wanted to check out that I, for some reason, have never listened to. Again, an artist that I think has a certain level of success and love, but has never really had that kind of critical adoration that has sort of endeared her to, the serious music fans of the world, like I unfortunately grew up as. So I never really listened to the music of Regina Spektor, but I checked out her album, her most beloved record among music fans, Soviet Kitsch from 2004. And this is a really striking record. This is basically the entire record is just piano rock, more even emphasis on the piano than the rock. Like, a good chunk of this is just sort of songs that she performs at her piano. Very Tori Amos-esque, very Fiona Apple-esque. But Regina absolutely has her own personality that distinguishes her from all of these other artists. There's some straight up undeniable songs on here. The song Us is, like, I think generally regarded as one of the best songs of the 2000s. And I cannot disagree in the slightest. This song is fucking amazing. Other amazing songs on here too: Ode to Divorce, The Flowers, Chemo Limo. A really strong record, one that I think has a certain set of limitations in terms of a very limited aesthetic. I think other people here, like Jake, I think you'd probably enjoy this record a bit more than me on the whole, but it's a record that's worth hearing for its highs alone, and just for encountering the very unique personality of Regina, who is a sort of New York-based but Russian in origin singer-songwriter with a very distinct personality and flair. One of the reasons I listen to this is because she does have a new record coming out soon, her first record in 6 years. So very excited to catch up with some of her other records and see where this new one takes us. Another record I will shout out is that I listened to the new album very recently released from fantastic Brazil-based shoegaze project Sonhos, Tomam, Conta, who we have reviewed before in the form of their fantastic split record with Paranormal and Asian Glow last year, Downfall of the Neon Youth, which is still one of my favorite albums of that year. And Sonhos, Tomam, Conta has always struck me as an artist with a distinct, niche within this louder, aggressive, emo-influenced, noisy shoegaze format. An artist that I think on some of those songs on that record took a little bit of black metal influence almost, had this real sort of serrated edge to what they were doing that really made them stand out. And I was a big fan of the record of their own that they put out last year called Hypnagogia as well. I still think that album is fantastic, really tight, really awesome. This new album, I think, is really more of the same. If you enjoy any of their previous work, you will enjoy this record. There's some fantastic songs on here. There's some really long tracks on here. The song Corpos Gelados Manjas del Sol is one of their best songs. There's also a great Nothing's Gonna Hurt You Anymore, which they released earlier this year, is a great song too. It's a really strong record. I think it's a little too long for its own good, which is really the thing that holds it back the most. It's a full hour of music from this artist, who I think functions best in the kind of 35 to 40 minute format, but it's still a really strong record. I think if you've enjoyed their music in the past, or if you're looking to hear them for the first time, I definitely would not advise against listening to this record. I enjoyed it a good deal. I also want to shout out the fact that I listened to 2 records that our friend Connor, friend of the podcast, Connor, considers 10 out of 10 records, 2 of his favorite records of all time that I'd never heard of. Well, one of them I'd heard of because I'd listened to another record from this artist, but I'll start with the one that was more foreign to me and the one that's more unique of the 2, which is a record from an artist called Robbie Basho in the genre of American primitivism. So it's this kind of really minimal folk music based very heavily around acoustic guitars and atmospherics. And this is a record that is actually released in the 70s, in 1978. It has a whopping 3.97 on Rate Your Music. So this is a beloved album. And certainly it's a very unique record. It reminded me, the only other artist I could think to compare it of was Arthur Russell, who came much later, and I think he was definitely influenced by Basho to a certain extent. But Basho is even more kind of avant-garde. The secondary tag for this is progressive folk, which definitely feels like an apropos descriptor as well. You have these kind of winding, lengthy songs. It's kind of like if Nick Drake went down the same sort of path as Scott Walker. Like, it just has that sense of like very isolated man with an acoustic guitar who's just kind of like strumming into the void. And there's something that's very striking about the presence and sound of this record. It has this emotional quality to it that you also can't really explain or describe why it's emotional. Another thing it reminded me of, an artist who I think is definitely influenced by Basho, is Adrienne Lenker. It reminded me specifically of her solo material. The Instrumentals record that she put out in 2020 has the same sort of vibe as this. But yeah, it's a record I want to spend more time with because I was so like struck by just how unlike anything else it sounded. And it is a record that kind of, it meanders deliberately because it's kind of about taking you into this expansive, American desert plains landscape. It has a really evocative album cover that I love, and it certainly sounds like a lost gem from the 70s. So yeah, I this gets a really strong recommendation from me. It's the kind of record that I think if you connect with it, it'll, like with as it has with Connor, if you connect with it, it'll become one of your favorite records. And even if you don't, I think there's a lot here to admire that will make it worth checking out. A very special album. But my favorite thing I've listened to this week across everything else, and it was something I only discovered last night, so very fresh listen, is from an indie rock / slowcore / indie pop band called Pinback, who are, I think Connor shouted this band out when he was last on my main episode of this podcast. I checked out their album Blue Screen Life a few weeks ago, which I enjoyed but was kind of underwhelmed by, and I thought, okay, this is just an indie rock band that's kind of not really for me, a bit too a bit too kind of sleepy for me. But because Connor has the record after it, Summer in Abaddon, he has this at a 10 and considers it one of his favorite records, I thought, okay, even though the last record I listened to them didn't really grab me. I want to give this a shot because this is apparently their best record. And I love this album. For some reason, there's just something about this record that really clicks. And I think it's the fact that it's a much more immediate sounding record than Blue Screen Life. It has this really like loud production for such minimal music, which actually works really well because it has this really kind of tight sound, like a power poppy sound. The hooks are fantastic. There's a real sort of American football-esque Midwest emo tinge to the guitar playing on this record. And it's just beautiful, vocally gorgeous. The songs are really sharp, really snappy. It's not a record that meanders at all. Every song on this record is bolded on Rate Your Music, so it's a very consistent record, and I just completely love it. I've only heard it once, but it's the kind of record where even after you hear it once, you know it's not going to grow off you. You know you're only going to like it more and more and more and more. So this is by far, I think, of all the records I've listened to this week that I'm shouting out, this is the one that I recommend the most strongly. I gave it a really strong 8 out of 10. I could see that becoming a 9. Once I get a little bit more familiar with it, it's just front to back fantastic. So I'm pleased to finally connect with this band. I thought maybe for a while that they wouldn't be for me, but they seem to be a generally overlooked indie rock sort of Midwest emo band from their era in the early 2000s. So I'm pleased to say that I've at least found one record that I really connect with, and I'll go back and revisit Blue Screen Life and see if it grows on me. But Summer in Abaddon, great album. Gets a rec from me. There we are. That brings us to the end of the segment and to the start of our main reviews for this episode. And we're going to kick things off with Bloc Party Alpha Games. Now, usually the way that we do things on the Jams and Tea podcast is usually we kick off with the bigger release, but also generally the one that, you know, we're likely to be more favorable on. I think we generally try and do it that way. And if we have a big stinker we're going to review, we usually try and save it for, I guess, the end of the episode, so it takes less out of us. But for whatever reason, we're doing it first. I think it makes sense because this is a record where I don't think it's going to take the energy out of us as much as some of the other bad records we've reviewed this year, just because it's like, it's funny and it's bad in so many funny ways. But also, as August and I were discussing before we recorded, it's also bad in ways that are really frustrating as well, because Bloc Party are a band that, for whatever reason, we've never formally reviewed on this podcast before. And the reason that's strange is that I feel like in our personal lives as friends, they're one of the bands that we have bonded over the most. As a group, they're one of the bands that we talk about the most frequently, it feels like. They're a band that we love.
They are a rare band where all of us love them to some extent.
Even to the extent where we have made apologies for subsequent records beyond their beloved debut that we feel have been overlooked, underappreciated, underrated. Records like Intimacy, records like 4. And we have this really strong connection to this band that I think August could probably speak to more than me, because August is probably the person who has strangely enough the strongest attachment to this band of all of us here. So Bloc Party are this kind of canonical indie rock band that made a series of really great records and leant heavily on the chemistry of their members, of the unique and kind of charismatic and sometimes wonky but always kind of endearing vocals of Kiley Okereke, the really intimate and gorgeous but also heavy and serrating guitar playing of Russell Lissack, and the generally fantastic drumming of Matt Tong as well. I've forgotten the name of the bassist, which is really bad, but because he's great too. But following 2012's 4, we had several significant departures, from this band. Matt Tong, the drummer, left. The bassist left.
Gordon Mokies.
That one, he left as well. And then Bloc Party, I guess, sought to try and not chase past glories with 2016's hymns, and just to kind of move on, I guess, and stop trying to be this really
chasing past glories, they pursue present mediocrities.
Yeah, exactly. So they made hymns, which is a bad album, not
Bad.
a good record at all. It's the record that gave us The Love Within, which is the most interesting thing that you could say about it, because The Love Within is, in my opinion, one of the worst songs of all time, probably my least favorite song of the 2010s. Genuinely, I think it's the song I hate the most that came out in that decade.
That's funny because that's my favorite song on that album, if only for entertainment value, because Hymns is a dull album. It is a record which set our expectations quite low. But that being said, I think there was a general excitement for whatever Alpha Games was going to be, because Bloc Party are a band who I think, even if their sound is consistent among those first 4 records, they are always a band who are constantly progressing and moving forward, pushing their sound in new directions. So the thing with Hymns was it was never going to be a permanent development, and I think that was pretty obvious. Then this album gets announced, and
it's been 6 years, it should be said as well.
It's been 6 years, yes.
Bloc Party, I think, have benefited somewhat from, being away for a certain amount of time so that you can kind of miss them. And I think the direction we see on this record is kind of forecasted by the band's decision to record and release a live album of Silent Alarm in, I think, 2019, played with with the band as they were then. And of course, if you listen to that, the songs are the songs of Silent Alarm. So they're great songs. But of course, you can tell that they're not all performed by the same members who originally recorded those songs. And I don't want to shit on the new members of the band, because I actually think that particularly the drummer has made significant advancements in keeping up with the band on this record than they had on Hymns, which was a record that was
Louise Bartel.
Louise Bartel, I think, has absolutely stepped up her game compared to some of the limp performances on Hymns, which, to be fair, was kind of designed to be a dance pop record, so not really a very rhythmic album anyway. But here we are with Alpha Games. And August, how would you describe the way the band have adapted their sound or moved forward from Hymns to make this record?
Bloc Party are definitely kind of falling back a bit on their roots here. They're more post-punk revival-y roots, a bit more of the indie rock sound that really elevated their early albums. But what they're not falling back on is their kind of style of production and sound. They're really kind of taking a merger of the two, I guess, eras, you could say, of their career, pre and post departure of half of the band. And I guess that's the best way to describe just the sheer sound of this album. But another thing that I would say they are really capitalizing on with this record is going for something a fair bit more trendy, you could almost say, than they ever have before. Something that's a little more immediately within the mainstream of vernacular and sound aesthetic and appeal is what I would describe a bit of this album as. That's the best way to sum it up without getting into the thematic side of this record.
I think Bloc Party are in what I would call a holding pattern. They're an old dog doing old tricks. Essentially, what they're doing with this record, I think, is the same sort of thing they tried to do with 4, which is kind of rebound from a record prior to it that was much more experimental and unusual for them as a band, and try and chase, I guess, try and, get the old Bloc Party back, try and win back those fans who want to make another Silent Alarm. And the frustrating thing about Bloc Party is that they seem to have a lack of conviction, because either they want to veer entirely away from making a record like Silent Alarm and actually assert themselves as a band that have variety. And when that doesn't work, then they completely capitulate, right? And they go back and say, okay, we're going to make a record that is, trying to sound more like Silent Alarm. Yeah. And I think this is a particularly egregious case of chasing past glories, because even with lead single Traps, which I believe you had a statement from the band that was like, we deliberately set out to make a song, that echoed the sound or like echoed the kind of pulse early stuff, and you have like little Russell doing little guitar licks and like little glitchy guitar stuff in there that reminds you of songs like Helicopter and some of the more sort of immediate tracks off of Silent Alarm. But the problem is Traps is garbage. It's bad.
Fucking awful.
It's a
the
bad song.
production is terrible. This is an album that, maybe despite surface appearances, is a deeply kind of sarcastic and ironic record that is not taking itself as seriously as you might, I guess, have a preconceived notion of what Bloc Party would normally do. This is a much sillier record. I mean, the title Alpha Games is a bit of a thematic summary for this album, because a lot of these tracks are about this kind of rivalry or battle for superiority over someone else, whether that's day drinker, sex, magic, and traps. That's kind of the thematic core of this album, and it's kind of poking fun at a lot of these ideas of superiority, masculinity. You can read it as a commentary upon that. The problem is that it sucks and doesn't work. And I'll explain a bit of that right now, in that a lot of the album, on just a writing level, the lack of seriousness and I guess more capitulating towards a more trendy kind of vernacular that's a lot more saying shit like gang gang all the way. You're clearly
looking like a snack.
Well,
aiming for a very particular demographic.
Well, I think it's fair to say he's kind of lampooning that demographic. Like,
yes, no, absolutely. He's lampooning that demographic. It's just not funny. It's just because at the end of the day, you're still listening to a 41-year-old man saying shit a 14-year-old should be saying. Well, and it is just not interesting. It is such a shallow, bland, surface level kind of critique and a bit of humor that it at least on that front, it falls completely flat.
Well, here's the thing, right? So this is a comedy record, right? Like, that's what it is by design. The problem is that it's cringe comedy, and that's what it is by design as well. It is comedy that is deliberately designed to make you go, ugh. And the problem with that is that you go, ugh. It succeeds at what it's trying to do, and what it's trying to do is present like caricatures that are thoroughly unpleasant, right? And yet, like, that's the goal, and fine.
And it's like, yes, they are unpleasant, and I don't want to listen to it.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Callum is a snake. Like, really? That song, like,
the part where he's like, "Oh, you're a wrong'un."
You know, some of the riffs on here aren't even bad. Like, Callum is a snake. I fucking love the riff on this song. It's just like, I want to shoot myself in the head when he's like, Callum is a snake. And it's like, shut
snake.
It's like, yeah, it's like you ruined it. It was fine, but it's just not funny, and it's obnoxious.
It doesn't even really fully commit to what it's doing as much, because you still have these moments of attempts at tenderness. Like, I will start off with my favorite song on the record. I think maybe we'll all agree on this, the best song on the record, which is the opening track, Day Drinker. And
easily,
for starters, like, it's a great song musically. It has a kind of muscularity to it. It has a kind of sense of heft to it that does feel like later era Bloc Party. Like, it's like a 4 song, like Octopus or something like that. But and actually lyrically, Kiley is like, he's singing really, really fast, and he's painting this kind of quite actually intriguing portrait of this character who's like incredibly dismissive of the people around him, who kind of uses the people around him, who kind of lapses into their vices, and, you know, casts judgment on people around him for, you know, not being the way that he is, or for looking down on him. And it's actually kind of a pretty strong character study of a song. Like, it actually opens the record in an intriguing mode, and I think it's a really strong choice to begin the record with.
And it's a great thematic statement of purpose, let that be said, in that like from that song, you perfectly get it. You're like, oh, alpha games. I see. Like it's not just a joke title. There's actually a reason it's called this. And like you, it's so weird because you start with this feeling of like, oh, I understand what they're going for, but they also go for something else in a similar. But it's frustrating. Fuck me.
Jake, what do you think of this fucking thing?
I was kind of surprised in how complicated I felt, and that I mean, I don't like it. It's really hard to come up with ways to just say it's bad. And I honestly ended up disliking it a lot more than I even thought that I would, just because I had heard singles like Traps, which just like the fucking like half of this album's problem, if you just want to hone in on, is the fact that it's just written like fucking garbage. I mean, it's just like, even if you have a good musical hook, it's always a horrible lyrical one. So you don't get like the incisive kind of, poppiness that you can find on Silent Alarm, where something like really comes around and just sort of like has a lot of muscular instrumental bravura, and also a sort of cutting lyricism that doubles as being very catchy, that doubles as staying in your head. And then you have this, like, I don't even want to interrogate songs like this for their meanings, just because they're written so badly. I hate Kiley on this album. I hate him. I hate listening to him. I hate the way he says things, like even the way he'll say stuff like on Day Drinker, where he's just like, I'm drinking. Like the way he just like over enunciates some of his syllables, even on the better moments on this album, are just like, it's fucking annoying. There's no better way to say it. Or Callum is a snake is another way to say it. He sounds like he's reading children a fucking Dr. Seuss book when he's going through the chorus of this, which is just so limp and barely even like here. He's just like it'll just be like a verse, and then all of a sudden he'll just go, Callum is a snake, and it's like, what the fuck are you doing, man? Or fucking like there's so many songs on here that are just complete fucking non-starters. Rough Justice. This is an incredible feat for Bloc Party as a band, as they have managed to create a song that is longer than 2 minutes that never starts.
Sonically, it's just so fucking unmusical too. Like it sounds so ugly.
And then you have The Girls Are Fighting right afterwards, which is a song that has the exact same fucking problem, where it just, here's a sonic idea, hope you like listening to it for 4 minutes, because we're just going to dwell in this one idea and never move or budge from it, and just sort of frustratingly mingle in this vaguely post-punky sound, where sometimes it sounds like it has impact, and sometimes it just falls completely flat. Like it feels like on the songs where they take an initiative to sort of display that kind of weird off the beaten path personality of Silent Alarm, like on something like Traps, where even if it doesn't sound great, the sort of core of the idea of like, oh, if this was through the lens of another album's production, I could kind of see the sound of this working, is that they so rarely even choose to do that. But even when they do, it's so lyrically limp that there's just nothing on this album that ever ignites. There's maybe 1 or 2 moments where it sort of stumbles over the line, like Day Drinker, where it's like, here is a competently structured song that has enough personality to sort of get you through it and be like, okay, I understand what they're trying to do here. Or a song like Of Things Yet to Come, where the first half of this song is fine. The second half of it, however, has a lot of interesting soloing. A lot of it gets really big, really bombastic, really interesting sounding. I at least like that there's some structural dynamism.
Yeah.
And literally those are the only 2 good songs on the album. There's fucking Sex Magic, spelled exactly like you would want it to be. Ha ha ha.
As in blood sugar.
This is the least sexy song ever made, maybe.
Earth, air, fire, water, earth, air,
Why?
fire,
Why are you fucking trying to introduce to me the 4 nations of the fucking Avatar people when you're talking about fucking this bitch?
Between her legs, divinity.
I don't have a problem when a band really focuses on one lyrical or like thematic idea. Like band we really like, Deftones. All Deftones songs are about killing people or fucking people, sometimes both. Bloc Party are a band where they kind of ring out this sort of really youthful experience from their music, like a real coming of age, but also there's like a development. There's about like just sort of like, or even Weekend in the City is a song that's, or not a song, is an album that feels kind of like the logical extension of something that comes after Silent Alarm, where, you know, it's about being a miserable, lonely fuck in your 20s instead of a miserable, lonely fuck in your teenage years. But they're able to wring something human out of it, even when they are being kind of childish and they get to the sort of, you know, sexually frustrated id of what they're talking about. Whereas it's just like, this is just Kiley farting around and talking about fucking. Like, I am not interested in this. There is nothing lyrical about this that remains compelling. It's just him bluntly throwing around very lazy, very anodyne hooks with occasional instrumental flourishes that sound kind of nice. But like, I'm sorry, if anyone was going to leave this band, the last person that should have done it was Matt Tong, and the first person that should have done it is Kiley, because frankly, he's just not trying. He wasn't trying on hymns, and he's like, it's like he's anti-trying here. He sounds like he's trying to tank this band and this album actively, because every time he is able to contribute any of his personality, it does this record a detriment. I hate listening to it. It's boring as shit. It doesn't sound good. None of these songs are structurally interesting, and the ones that manage to be structurally interesting are only that way because they are competent, aggressively competent. 6 out of 10 fine levels of competent. But actually listening and trying to talk about this fucking sucks, man. This album is awful.
You know what?
Fuck. I hate talking about this thing, man.
I know that I have this rated the same way that you do, and yet I feel like I like it significantly more than you do.
Probably. I fucking like I'm probably gonna lower my rating just because the more I think about this, the more I actively just have so much disdain for it. There's just, this album suits no purpose. I feel like even Hymns, for as bad and boring of an album as that is still like them doing and trying something. This is just watered down version of shit they've already done, and it doesn't, like, what reason does any human being alive have to sit down and listen to an album like Alpha Games? There is not one.
Here's what I'll say about Hymns, actually, now that you mention it, is that I think Hymns has a much better commitment to its concept than this album does, because Hymns is a record explicitly about Kelly's introspection, kind of coming to terms with his sexuality and religion and all that fun stuff. And I think Hymns is a much more focused exploration of that than this album is of its own respective kind of thematic core and concept. Even if Hymns falls short in a lot of places, it feels to me like a lot more of a focused and unified record.
Here's where I disagree that the one person in this band who should have left is Kiley. I think the problem with Kiley here is, like, when we think about the Bloc Party music that we love the most, when we think about the Bloc Party songs that resonate the most with us, they are songs that are personal, right? They're songs that tap into a particular emotional experience that feels real, that feels like something we can really connect to. And they are songs where Kiley is expressing something genuine and raw and powerful, and he taps into a feeling of youth or a feeling of innocence that, you know, it feels genuinely emotional. And those are the songs you connect to the most, is when Kiley is just being himself and being emotional and being real. And the problem with this record is the fact that Kiley is spending almost the entire record trying to be someone else, trying to make fun of this kind of facade, when that kind of thing, that sort of satire or whatever, is the antithesis of his strengths. Essentially, he's leaning so far away from the things that make him endearing as a songwriter, from the things that make him endearing as a vocalist as well, because in order to complement this concept of these kind of like, you know, making fun of these alpha male type figures, he has to do with these sort of silly voices and stuff. He has to lean into the kooky aspect, kind of, you know, accentuate that parody. But of course, it's taking him further and further away from the things that he's actually good at. And that's
And
why
he sounds like a fucking buffoon. He doesn't sound like he's parodizing these alpha male characters. He just sounds like a fucking cartoon character, and not in a way that complements the material. He's just like, Callum is a snake. It's like, shut the fuck up, man.
meet me in the boom boom room and we can do what you
mean-
like.
Looking like Bambi.
Looking like Bambi.
Now,
Sweet ass candy.
I get that. Now, look, there
Gonna
are
bounce on my willy, make me feel silly.
I don't like drugs. I give lyrical hugs.
there are
I
moments.
don't like hugs, I give lyrical drugs.
There are moments on this record that I do like, aside from the opening track as well. I
There
think
are.
of Things Yet to Come as a
Lying.
strong song. No, I do. I think it's a genuinely emotional song. I think it's one of the better songs musically. However, it still has a ceiling because you have one of the most unintentionally hilarious lyrics on this album. Let me find it. I trim my leaves in search of growth.
Thanks, Kelly, for evoking shaving pubic hair.
And it's supposed to be a pun as well, I think, on like growth. And there's like a passage in this song of Things Yet to Come where it's like, in the context of the song, Kelly is kind of unintentionally talking about my relationship with him as a singer when he sings, "You were a good man, you were the best. Now you're less than a memory. You're an echo now, a faint facsimile. You said hope is something you give yourself, but it's not the same. I don't know how to get over you." Like, yeah, man, that's a lot of that is how I would describe my relationship with you as a songwriter. And so there's two songs towards the end of this record that I think have real potential, that I actually, the more I listen to this record, the more I kind of like them, but also the more I have to confront the serious limitations they have. And these are the songs In Situ and If We Get Caught. So In Situ, I think, is one of the more musically accomplished songs on the record. It has like some soloing and some real sort of fiery guitar stuff happening, especially towards the second half of it. I even, against my better wishes, I've kind of gotten I get a little bit of enjoyment out of, "Ooh, my baby's got a smart mouth." I don't know why. That's just one of the sillier moments on the records where I kind of enjoy the way he's inflecting. And I think it's got something to do with the fact that the song is just a bit more musically muscular. That said, it still has lines like talking about cryptocurrencies with the boys of LSE, getting real deep in the middle of the street. I get it.
You know who could make this fucking work is fucking everything. They do shit like this all the fucking time.
Yes. I mean, that's like, this song lyrically is very much like an Ivory Tower type song. And that song like so much better than this. But talking about cryptocurrencies with the boys of LSE, getting real deep in the middle of the street. I get the satire here. I get the parody. But like, when you're trying to do a parody, you can't just say some shit like, "Oh, getting real deep in the middle of the street," because there's no like, you're not like, there's nothing to interrogate there. You're just being like, you've got all the depth of a fucking Aaron Sorkin screenplay or an Oliver Stone.
This is
movie.
what this is, and this is what I think about it.
Yeah, it's
Bottom
so
text.
silly. And then If We Get Caught, all right. So If We Get Caught, to me, is the most hymns-like song on this record, and actually probably my third favorite song on this album. I think,
Yeah, probably.
because I talked about, how the thing that's missing from so much of this is the sincerity and the kind of emotional appeals that, are a big part of the best Bloc Party music, I think. And sometimes Kelly can take that too far, and sometimes it can become cloying, but it's always more preferable to when he's trying to be smarmy and smart, right? So there's an emotional tone here that I really, really connect to, and melodically it's stronger too. But the reason why I make the hymns comparison is, like songs like The Love Within and Virtue, it has this absolutely fucking unbearable musical decision that is almost constantly present, which is that.
Yes. That just gaudy grating synth.
And this is a kind of musical decision that could only be made by the same band that felt that whatever the fuck they were doing on The Love Within was tasteful, right? It's just, you're making a deliberately annoying sound. And I get what they're doing, right? They've done sort of successful executions of this kind of like, looping, synthesized, cut up angular sound, right? On records like Intimacy and Weekend in the City and
Uh,
stuff.
I mean, hell, yeah, like one of the big singles from fucking Weekend in the City,
Flux.
Flux. Yes, that's like a perfect example of this execution of a looping melodic phrase that,
Or even one of my favorite deep cuts of theirs, which is the song Truth off of 4, is like a more successful musical
Yes.
version of this idea. But here it's just like, for some reason, this guitar tone is pitched up like 3 octaves higher than it needs to be. And if that were slightly tweaked, I would have very few problems with this song. I do think that one thing I liked about it initially that is beaten into the ground so much that it becomes annoying is the backing vocals, which are kind of used to accentuate the melody, but it becomes so repetitive. The cut, it becomes so repetitive that it starts to drive it into the ground.
One thing I will say about the best songs on here is I think they do have a bit of the same problem as the rest of the album, even for the moments I particularly enjoy, like Day Drinker and If We Get Caught, is that I think the sentiments expressed on them are not exactly the most original, bold things that Bloc Party have ever written in terms of song topics and lyrical topics. They still ring just the slightest bit hollow and cliche on a certain inspection.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what I think you're talking about, Ryley, with this album having a very set ceiling for just how good and how enjoyable it can be, because the material on here isn't fundamentally unworkable. It's just what they've done, what the band have done internally in terms of limitations that are kind of cast onto this album by virtue of its like subject matter, concept, and writing are those very limitations that form the ceiling for the record.
And look, I've accepted that Bloc Party undeniably have a ceiling now. They'll never be, better than a certain level anymore. And I've accepted that. And so I'm just happy if a Bloc Party record can give me, at least a few reminders and genuine emotional moments that I can connect to on some level. But we haven't talked about the worst song on this album. It's the second worst song this band's ever recorded, I think, after The Love Within. And frankly, no, The Love Within is definitely worse than this, but it's really like, yes, it is the closing track here, the Peace Offering, which is
oh my god,
one of the most bizarre endings.
This?
It's one of the most bizarre endings to a record in recent memory, I think. You have this bizarre, barely musical spoken word song where he is speaking from the perspective of
something
this
really wrong, right?
I think self-righteous actor or celebrity figure who has this kind of like sense of self-entitlement and betrayal by the people around him. Very much contiguous with the kind of character he's portraying on other songs in this record. But he is doing this spoken word thing, which is grating because of the tone of his voice. But more than that, more meaningfully than that, he's just stretching out these lines so like portentously. And I get that that's intentional, but you have to listen to him like just absolutely draw a whole fucking meal out of I have no need for your scented candles. And I don't wish you death by stinging nettles.
And it doesn't help that the instrumental complementing this can't even do us a favor of being some measure of entertaining.
Distant guitar plucking.
It's like
boring.
This is this band's Pink Cell Phone, in my opinion, right? Like it's just a song, that just has nothing going for it, no potential even to ignite.
The voice he's doing on this fucking song, it sounds like he's trying to imitate like a dandy cartoon whale. It's like, hello there, Tyler. Would you like to fucking just shut the fuck up, you fucking... I hate this fucking album.
Yes, it's bad.
As illustrated.
And it's funny, like I was the whole time, especially revisiting it, like I was wanting to give it cut it a little bit more slack, still call it a bad album, but just say, hey, there's a little more here that I can connect to. And I always got to this final song and it felt like I was being spat in the face for wanting to think that, especially after In Situ and If We Get
The
Caught.
middle moment where he breaks his delivery and he sounds like, you're not being honest.
Yes. It's bad shit. It's awful. And yeah, and I don't really have anything else to say.
You know what? I have a little more to say.
Go off.
Please.
In that I've never thought Bloc Party are an unsalvageable band. Even after I heard Hymns, even after this, there's a part of me that maybe foolishly thinks that this band can still be good, because for as bad as this band gets, I'm always going to listen to their records, because they, regardless of the final quality, are always trying something. And that's what I think can be said about this album, is even if it's ultimately, in our opinions, a failure, it is still going for something. And I think that sense of vision, that sense of intent, leaves me with a bit of hope. It leaves me with just like the faintest glimmer that maybe their next record will be better, because perhaps they'll find the direction on here and be like, oh, maybe this wasn't our best, and they'll do something better. I mean, all I can hope is that the love within keeps moving upwards, shining brighter than any drug.
Let's do our favorite tracks or least favorite tracks and rating. Jake, why don't you go first?
My favorite track is... My least favorite track is 3.5.
So my favorite tracks are going to be Day Drinker. You know what? I'll say If We Get Caught. And you know what? Even though I don't think it's an amazing song, I still really like a bit of the hook vocal intonations of By Any Means Necessary, which I'm shouting out just because I can. Because there are parts of that song I like.
Hey, it's an opinion.
Yeah, and opinions are like assholes. Mine stretches to 8 inches. What? His favorite is The Peace Offering. I give it a 4 out of 10.
All right. My 3 favorites are Day Drinker, Of Things Yet to Come, and If We Get Caught. My least favorite is The Peace Offering. I'll do 3 least favorites. So it's The Peace Offering, then Traps, then the absolutely abysmal Rough Justice. And I'm going to give this a 4 out of 10 also, which means that we have an average of 3.8 for Bloc Party's Alpha Games. All right, let's move steadily into our second review of the day, which is, of course, the new album from Let's Eat Grandma, Two Ribbons. Now, Let's Eat Grandma are a band that they're originally from Norwich in England. They consist of 2 girls named Rosa and Jenny, and they have been lifelong best friends who have been making music together. They've been releasing records together since they were about 15 years old, I think, which is when their debut album, I, Gemini, came out. And they are definitely multi-talented individuals. I mean, they are on that debut record when they were teenagers. You have instrumentation that varies as much from xylophones to saxophones to recorders, all these different instruments that these girls are able to play. And though that record was recorded mostly with like Casio keyboards and, you know, instruments they borrowed from their school's music room, I think, like, it was a really unique and strange record that sounds like absolutely nothing else. And they built on it beautifully with 2018's I'm All Ears, which still is one of my favorite albums of that year. Probably the single album I listened to the most that came out that year. A record that I think had some cosigns production-wise, some assistance from Sophie and Faris Badwan of the great gothic indie rock band The Horrors, and a fantastic album, I think, a really unique and wonderful sounding pop record that had a lot of the same eccentricities as their debut, but made into better, more fully formed songs, in my opinion. But it's been a long time since I'm All Ears came out. That was in 2018. It's been 4 years, and Rosa and Jenny have had a lot of growing up to do. I mean, when you become, modestly successful as musicians while you're a teenager, I mean, there's a certain level of pressure, there's a certain level of stress that puts you under. And I understand why Rosa and Jenny had to take some time to live their lives and actually grow up and be teenagers for a bit before returning to make music again. And also, this is a record, their new record, that is influenced by a great deal of stress and grief as well. There was a period during the time before they started making this record where, despite being lifelong friends, they drifted apart from each other. Their friendship went through some rocky times, and they didn't see each other for a while and didn't even know if they were going to be able to make another record. And this was compounded in 2019 by the fact that Jenny's boyfriend, who was a fantastic musician in his own right, tragically passed away of cancer at a very young age. And that was something that, obviously, that's a traumatic thing for any teenager to experience, and something that I think will have absolutely pushed back even further the amount of time that these girls needed to process and live their lives and be able to make another record again. And so this is an album that is definitely deeply tinged by the experience of grief, but also the experience of their friendship going through that hardship and having to come out the other side of it. And it has come out the other side of it stronger than ever. I think that this new record is the most consistent and well-polished and thematically cohesive record that they have released to date. It is a remarkably triumphant album for these two girls, considering what they have been through. There were a few people who, I think, quite cynically, when I'm All Ears came out, said that, well, the only reason this record sounds as good as it is because they were working with Sophie and Faris from the Horrors. And I think that, well, for one, the best song on that record was one that they composed entirely by themselves, Falling Into Me, but also very cynical, I think, to view that in that way and to try and diminish the achievements of those girls as songwriters and as musicians, especially considering how many instruments they play, and especially considering how fantastic they are vocally and how great they are lyrically as well. And so Two Ribbons is a triumphant return that will, I think, confidently dispel any of those concerns that these girls have nothing in the tank and that they rely on their collaborators, because this is a record that could only have been made by these two young girls and has so much of what I've always loved about them as personalities, but actually transfused into songs that feel really worked on and really refined. This is a record that has very little fat either. It's really tight. There's really only 8 songs on this and a couple of interludes that are really only there to build into the songs that follow them. So they don't really feel extraneous. They feel more like just a part of the flow of the record. And I think it's a record that's remarkably consistently engaging and beautiful. It's a record that's very sad, and it has a sort of structure to it where it opens with these bombastic, beautiful, gorgeous and lush synth pop songs that actually are quite exuberantly positive for the most part, that kind of speak about their renewed friendship and love for each other, particularly in that opening track, Happy New Year, where, they're singing about how, they are meant for each other and they will always be friends and they'll always have this connection no matter what happens. You'll always be my best friend. And it's very moving. And also it makes you want to dance. It makes you want to get up. I remember when this song actually dropped on 12 o'clock midnight on January 1st. It was the first thing I listened to at the start of this year. And it felt so, it felt like it was setting a tone for the year, that it was going to be better than the year before it. And it's a great song. And you have this progression throughout the record where you have these really bright and lush and gorgeous and maximal pop songs on the first half. And you have a second half where that brightness and that lushness kind of gradually curdles into sadness. And you get a more reflective and somber tone in the back half of this record. And some of the songs that I would describe more as growers, but have some more of the most sort of mature and lasting sentiments that are expressed across this entire record. Songs like Sunday and songs like Strange Conversations. Jake, I know that this is a record that you've connected with really strongly. So I'd love to hear from you. I mean, what your expectations were versus what this record delivered for you, and what it's been like for you listening to this over the last 7 days.
Well, I've been listening to I'm All Ears since it came out, and that, until somewhat recently, actually, is an album that I've kind of listened to for 4 or 5 specific songs that I was overwhelmingly in love with, that were encased inside of an album that was a bit, I mean, I guess I would just say structurally a bit lopsided, I suppose. I did listen to it somewhat recently and came away with it way more positive than I've ever walked away from that album, just because I feel like as my musical sensibilities have grown, I've like really attached to how adventurous that album is for its synth poppiness. It's also just like you have the industrial insanity of shit like Hot Pink, the one of the Sophie produced tracks on there, and Falling Into Me is just one of the best fucking songs of the 2010s, full stop. And that's an album where I was just like, this sets up the perfect expectation for a rest of a career of just like, I know that these girls are capable of making something that is innovative, but also relies on a certain fundamental understanding of the form that could really be played with and tinkered with in a way that I find interesting and even more compelling than I find it here. And I walked away from Two Ribbons basically fulfilled by all of those expectations, because yeah, I mean, this thing just really, really, really works for me. That front half of the album is definitely the most immediate half. I think that the sort of run from Happy New Year into Insect Loop is just fucking 5 of the most perfect synth pop songs I've heard on an album since Carly Rae Jepsen's Emotion. I mean, Happy New Year is just fantastic and enormous. When you hear the sounds of the fireworks that are sampled on this song, it's just, I mean, like Ryley said, you just want to get up and you want to dance. And you immediately go into Levitation, which is vying for my favorite song on here. It's my favorite song on the first half, just because this is the biggest song on here that I connect with the most, in that it presents both the leap that the girls have made since I'm All Ears, and that I think this is thematically and lyrically a more well-realized and cohesive piece that manages to come across as really inspiring and fulfilling and warm. And Levitation is just sort of the description of this pure, overwhelming, joyful ephemera that's just so beautifully realized. Especially that sort of the like guitar work on the end of the song here is just fucking outstanding. Like, whenever these girls want to focus and hone in on an instrumental idea, like specifically on a song like Insect Loop, which is just like one of the most creative songs I think they've ever come up with, the way that they implement the guitar on here is just really hypnotic and winding, and it doesn't sacrifice it for the largeness of the synth tones that they're playing with on the first half. And even Hall of Mirrors too, a fucking fantastic choice for a single. But a lot of the moments that I find myself the most captivated with are on the second half, just like Sunday and Strange Conversations, where they sort of peel everything back, and they, instead of talking about the sort of bombastic emotions that they're going for on the front half, they talk about more detail-oriented, specific songs that are more emotionally enrapturing to me, that are more immediate in how like just lyrical and interesting they are. I suppose like the final stretch of it is something I kind of had to get used to, but I love the kind of sound play and just the idea of In the Cemetery kind of sounding like an Anamanaguchi song with some of its synth tones. But just the idea of a song that's so bright and colorful like In the Cemetery, and the title of that is sort of indicative of what they're trying to do with the record as a whole, of trying to sort of paint over the tragedy or inherent sadness of a place like a cemetery with their music. And Strange Conversations is, I guess I might say that might be my actual favorite song on here, which is a very plaintive kind of ballad that's just sort of this electro acoustic song that's just the lyricism here is really what gets me. The sort of like, and I'm waking in pools of light, the way that they're just like relaying all of the visual information of how they feel in these songs are so arresting. I find the blend here to be remarkably simple, but also just really effective. I like how the album, in its structure of having that kind of bigger first half, feels like an inflation and then a gradual deflation that kind of ends you and leaves you with a sense of peace by the end of it, because those last two songs are a little bit more focused and tempered in how that they're paced. And not to mention, I think the girls as not just songwriters, but as performers have increased as well over the years. I think the vocal performances on here, confident and idiosyncratic, and they might not be as weird or off the wall as some of the stuff on I'm All Ears is, but it's in service of being a little bit more focused. This is just an album that I put on and I just find myself completely lost in. It's one of the more, I guess, it's one of the records I've listened to this year the most, just because of how much it kind of leaves me with a kind of slate clearing by the end of it. I just feel very uncomplicated and very pleasant, and like something has been dispelled from me. And I can rarely say that about synth pop albums that go for this kind of maximalist approach, but I find that they are weaving in the things that make them unique as artists a little bit more deftly than they did on their previous effort, which does lead it to be a little bit less unique sounding. But overall, in terms of how much I feel the effectiveness and the emotionality of their music, it feels a little bit more refined in that respect to me. So yeah, this has honestly climbed its way steadfastly up to being one of my favorite albums of the year, and I'm just really grateful for its existence, frankly, just because the world needs more emotionally evocative, honest synth pop that's as ambitious as this is.
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of the kind of record that I wouldn't think I would love this as much as I would. Like, I think it would be just on paper like a simplification of the wackiness and wildness of their last couple of records, and just a synth pop format. Although only the first 4 songs are synth pop, and the rest is kind of like indie rock to varying extents. But there is I think it's the emotional tangibility of it, and how, I guess, refined and just tight this album is as well, how little fat there is. Like, even the interludes, like In the Cemetery, gets much more moving when you appreciate it as kind of like setting the scene for the next song, which is like about having conversations in the cemetery with the person who's passed away, and or with God, or like having some kind of like trying to engage in some kind of dialogue to try and understand the way that you're feeling and why you feel that way, and to try and get some kind of answers. My favorite song on the record, which deals with a similar theme, is the song Watching You Go, off of the first half of the record, which is, I think, alongside Strange Conversations, the song that is most directly about grief, written by Jenny, obviously about the last days of Billy, her boyfriend's life, and the confusion of the time that she was going through. And her vocal performance here is astonishing. The way this song builds up and climaxes with these incredible guitar parts and just amazing vocal,
the hook
riches
is
and stuff.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, unreal, unbelievable. Levitation, I think, is one of the best pop song singles of the year.
Yeah,
absolutely fantastic stuff. Hall of Mirrors, I really appreciate. This was actually the lead single, and this was released ages ago, because this album got pushed back. It was supposed to come out in February, I think, and then got pushed back because of the vinyl delay and all that sort of thing. So this album's been done and kind of been dripping out for a while. But Hall of Mirrors was the first song, and I didn't realize this until I kind of read into the liner notes of the record. I assumed this was another song about their kind of friendship, like there wasn't a girl that made me shy until I talked to you, etc., etc. But this is actually a song by Rosa about her sexuality and coming to terms with understanding herself in a new way that she hadn't understood herself before. And she hasn't gone into a lot of detail, and that's fair enough. But there is the sentiment that's expressed here about when you grow up and when you mature and when you kind of, exit your teenage years and you realize you're an adult, like, and you realize certain things about yourself. And I can say this as someone who's had like revelations about my, gender and sexual identity as I've, become an adult. You do kind of feel like you're following this new part of yourself into a hall of mirrors. You feel like you have to, in coming to terms with the way that you are, you have to surrender so much of what's familiar, and it's scary. And you have to go down this pathway of unpredictability. And it's a beautiful song in the way that it communicates that feeling. And just has another, again, every Let's Eat Grandma record has at least one fantastic saxophone solo performed by Jenny, usually. On the first record, it's Deep Six Textbook, which is one of their best songs. On the second record, it's in Falling Into Me. And here it's in this song. And it's, Jenny's a fantastic saxophone player. So it's a real treat to hear her do that. The song I'd say that's grown on me the most is Sunday, which is just a gorgeous breakup song written by Rosa. As she wrote this before having to end a relationship that she was in, as a way of kind of processing those impending emotions and the difficulty of having to go through that before it happens. And it's not exactly, a subject matter that hasn't been written about a million times before, but it is a beautiful capturing of that feeling where that something beautiful has to come to an end, and you just have to process that before it happens, about bracing yourself for that. And the way that she sort of sings on that hook, if you want to go, then I'll be here. Like, it's beautiful. It's beautiful stuff. I love the sound of the acoustic guitars when they come in. They're so warm and kind of autumnal. I love that. And then probably the most emotional song on the record is the closing track, the title track, Two Ribbons, which is also, again, indicative of the way this record just kind of gradually strips itself back as it goes along. This is by far the sparest thing here. And it is, again, it's a song that's kind of like the inverse of Happy New Year, right? Like Happy New Year kind of comes out of this song in terms of the resolution of this song, which is about, about a friendship that is fractured, about, a friendship that has frayed, about a friendship that has kind of fallen apart, and rediscovering each other. You could even read it through the lens of a relationship as well, like rediscovering why you first connected, rediscovering, the way you first felt about each other after that has kind of become harder to see for a while. And it's a beautiful song. And Jeannie's vocal especially is just, she really hits certain notes here, and she hits certain tones that it's brave, because it's brave to sing like this, to sing about such an emotional thing, and to do it with so little adornment, behind you to hide behind.
When the instrumentals scale back, their voices get bigger on songs like Sunday and Two Ribbons. And I feel like that way of filling in the gap is sort of the through line of how there's sort of a consistency that's still maintained, even though there are parts of the record that are so different from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. The part where she sings, I haven't thought for weeks of anyone but you. I just want to find the answer. I just want to be your best friend. Like, man, that shit, that shit's hurt this week. Like, there's a lot of this album that really snuck up on me in terms of just fucking me up emotionally. And it's already been a week where I've been particularly emotionally vulnerable for unrelated reasons. So yeah, it's exactly what I wanted, could have wanted from this band. And I'm very excited that they've managed to keep the spark for me that they had 4 years ago when I became obsessed with their music. And even though they're just a little bit younger than me, I feel like I've kind of grown up a little bit, or entered adulthood alongside them, because I was still a teenager when I'm All Ears came out, or barely a teenager. So yeah, anyway, that's me. That's my connection. August, what are your feelings?
I do admire a lot about this record, I will say. I do like, as you two point out, the emotional forthrightness of it, the honest, the kind of brutal honesty of it. That all is quite interesting to me. I guess this record does leave me at a distance, because I can't say I've ever been some huge like synth pop fan. I've never been terribly crazy about this particular styling of music. I can certainly recognize this as a good execution of that style. But to me, the two vocalists, and this is probably just a me problem, I can hardly tell the difference between the two. When I first heard this album, I genuinely thought it was one singer throughout the whole thing, and the other was just producing and composing the album. I certainly don't have any bones with them as composers. I think there are some parts that I do think sound a bit tacky. Like I think the fireworks samples on the opening track frankly sound terrible to my ears. Those just completely miss for me and sound so like hollow and like a stock sound effect. They really take me out of that song so much. And that's just kind of the tone for the whole record, that I think it's nice. I think it's pleasant. And I think some of their experiments are kind of cool. I think Levitation, the second track, is quite good. It's just a lot of the moments here don't quite add up to being terribly substantial for me. I just didn't find myself terribly engaged with the record, terribly involved with it. I gave it a couple listens and it just felt to me like pretty good synth pop, but still not really blowing me away or taking me any interesting places. It reminded me a lot of that Magdalena Bay album from last year, in that my emotional reaction to that was very similar to this, where it's like generally competent, but I don't feel I'm going to return to it.
Fair enough. I appreciate the bravery of you sticking it out to review an indie synth pop and rock album with us, knowing full well that it's probably not going to be your thing, because I do appreciate hearing what you actually think anyway, and what moments stand out to you for better or worse. So, very good. Good shit. All right. Let's do our favorite tracks and ratings then for Leg. Let's see, Grandma. 2 Ribbons.
Oh, you were I was like, what the fuck did you fucking say to me?
Leg. That's their acronym. I have a good respect for bands who have acronyms that are in and of themselves words, especially when, in the case of bands like Jimmy Eat World, it can be somewhat less advantageous. My 3 favorite tracks are Watching You Go, Levitation, and probably Insect Loop. And my least favorite track, I really don't have one. I can't even get mad at the interludes, because I think that Half Light just goes straight into Sunday so perfectly, and In the Cemetery is, that's what I wanted to say. In the Cemetery sounds to me so much like an M83 instrumental, like one you would hear.
M83 and Anamanaguchi. Yep.
Yeah, and I mean they're both so similar anyway. But yeah, it reminded me so much of like Hurry Up We're Dreaming sort of interlude tracks, and I really enjoyed it for that reason. I don't have a least favorite, honestly, at all. I'm going to give the album a very effusive 8 out of 10.
Nice. I would say my 3 favorites. I liked Levitation a fair bit, Hall of Mirrors, and Insect Loop. Least favorite would be Happy New Year. I would pick something from the second half, but I find that half quite bland. It gets a 5 out of 10 from me. Not my thing, but I'm glad I tried it.
My 3 favorite songs are going to be Levitation, Strange Conversations, and Sunday. I, like Ryley, do not have a least favorite. I mean, it's all of these are just, it's mostly faultless for me. I give the album a 9 out of 10.
Fuck yes. That means that we have an average rating of 7.3 for Let's Eat Grandma's 2 Ribbons. Let us know at home what you think of either of the albums we've discussed today, Bloc Party's Alpha Games and Let's Eat Grandma's 2 Ribbons.
How does grandma taste to you?
Want to hear from you in the comments below, so let us know what you think. If you like the podcast, if you enjoy what you have listened to, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, head on over to the YouTube link in the description. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Both of those things really help us out an awful lot. If you want to go on above and beyond and support us even more, you can hit the join button on our YouTube page. And for just $1 a month, you can become one of our besties, get your name featured in the title call of every video on this channel, plus priority comment response. And if you want to recommend us some music to listen to, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile.
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Gatorade. Is it in you?